The fog hung low over Blackthorn town, curling around the crooked lamp-posts and shrouding the narrow streets in a gray, suffocating haze. Lila tightened her scarf against the chill, her heart hammering with a mixture of fear and excitement. Beside her, Mark, her older brother, shifted uncomfortably, squinting at the dark silhouette of the mansion looming on the edge of town. Its jagged roof lines and broken windows seemed almost alive, watching them. "Are you sure about this?" Mark's voice trembled slightly, though he tried to mask it with skepticism. "Maybe we should just—" "No," Lila interrupted, her eyes fixed on the mansion. "We've heard the stories, Mark. The disappearances, the whispers at midnight. We have to see for ourselves." They had spoken to the townsfolk earlier, but the encounters had done little to calm their nerves. An old woman with rheumy eyes had whispered hoarsely, "The house, it listens, and when it answers, it does not forgive." A young boy had refused to meet their gaze, muttering, "Don't go, they never come back." Even the innkeeper had given them a warning in a hushed tone, avoiding their eyes. Now, standing in the mist at the foot of the hill, Lila felt a strange pull, as though something deep within the mansion was aware of her presence. The air seemed heavier here, thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. The clock in the town square chimed 11, and the fog seemed to thicken, swirling unnaturally around them. "Do you hear that?" Lila whispered, her ears straining. At first it was faint, a soft, almost melodic murmur drifting on the wind. Then the words became clearer, teasingly close. "Lila, Lila." Her name, drawn out, echoed around her like a ghostly sigh. Mark froze, panic flashing in his eyes. "It's just the wind," he muttered, though his tremor betrayed him. The mansion's front doors, blackened and rotting, loomed ahead. Shadows flickered behind the broken windows, moving in ways that defied logic. One shadow stretched, detached itself from the wall, and slid silently across the floor inside. Lila's breath caught, but she stepped forward, curiosity overtaking fear. A sudden chill swept over them. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, forming fragmented phrases. "Why did you come? Don't leave forever." Lila's pulse quickened, and she glanced at Mark. His face was pale, lips pressed tight, but there was a spark of determination. He wouldn't let her go alone. Hand in hand, they reached the doorstep. Lila pushed the door, and it creaked open, revealing a grand foyer covered in dust and cobwebs. The faint scent of mildew and something else, metallic like blood, filled their nostrils. Broken furniture and shattered glass littered the floor. Faded portraits stared at them with accusing eyes, their painted faces warped in expressions of fear. As midnight approached, the mansion seemed to breathe around them. The shadows deepened, the whispers sharpened. Lila took a deep breath. "We're here," she said softly. "Let's find out what's waiting inside." And as the clock struck 12, the first shadow detached fully from the wall, gliding silently towards them. The air inside Blackthorn Mansion was colder than the night outside, carrying a damp, musty scent that clung to their clothes. Lila's footsteps echoed unnaturally on the cracked marble floor, each sound magnified as if the house itself was listening. Mark followed closely, his hand tight around hers, eyes darting to every dark corner. "This place, it's alive," Mark muttered under his breath, swallowing hard. "I don't like it." "Alive?" Lila whispered back, her voice trembling slightly, though curiosity burned in her chest. "It's just an old house, right?" A low, unintelligible murmur drifted down the hallway, sending a shiver through them. It sounded like dozens of voices layered over one another, soft and mocking, yet distinctly calling Lila's name. "Lila, Lila, come closer." The whispers seemed to seep from the walls themselves, curling around them like smoke. They moved through the foyer into a long corridor lined with faded portraits. Eyes in the painting seemed to follow their every movement. One portrait in particular drew Lila's gaze, a stern-faced man in Victorian attire, his painted hand pointing down the hall as if warning them away. A cold breeze brushed past, carrying the scent of damp earth and something metallic like rusted iron. "Did you hear that?" Mark whispered, his voice shaking. "I think it's coming from upstairs," Lila said, her curiosity stronger than her fear. They climbed the narrow, creaking staircase, each step groaning as though protesting their intrusion. The hallway above was closed doors, each one slightly ajar, whispering fragments of conversation from decades past. Lila pressed her ear against one door, hearing a child laughing, then screaming, and the sound of hurried footsteps that vanished before she could see the source. Another door revealed a mirror. Their reflections stared back, but their eyes moved independently, blinking and shifting as though alive. Lila gasped. Mark grabbed her arm, dragging her away, but the whispers followed, growing louder, more urgent. In a small study at the end of the hall, they found a dusty journal lying on a table. The pages were filled with frantic handwriting, detailing the experiences of previous visitors, shadows that watched, whispers that imitated loved ones, and the sensation of being followed even when no one was visible. One entry read, "The shadows speak, but they do not lie. They feed on what you fear most." Suddenly, a shadow detached from the wall, elongating unnaturally and sliding toward them. Mark froze in terror. Lila stepped forward instinctively, but the shadow lunged, enveloping Mark in darkness. She screamed and grabbed for him, but it vanished into the wall, leaving only a chill and the echo of his terrified shout. The whispers intensified, forming coherent words this time. "Do you wish to see? Do you wish to join us forever?" Lila's heart pounded. Every instinct screamed for her to run, but something deep inside urged her forward. The mansion wasn't just a building. It was a predator, alive and aware, testing them, drawing them deeper into its secrets. As Lila looked around the shadowed study, she realized that every corner of the mansion seemed to shift subtly, as if the house itself were rearranging its walls and doors. The whispers became a chorus, calling her name and laughing softly. With a deep breath, she steeled herself. "I need to find him," she whispered, and without another word, she stepped into the darkness, toward the unknown corridors where the shadows waited. The air grew heavier as Leela moved deeper into Blackthorn Mansion, her heart hammering with every step. The whispers had multiplied, echoing from every corner, twisting around her mind. "You shouldn't be here. Forever." One voice, soft and familiar, called her name, sending a shiver down her spine. She reached a door partially hidden behind tattered curtains. Something compelled her to open it. Beyond lay a narrow staircase descending into darkness, the mansion's hidden basement. The smell of damp stone and rot hit her immediately, making her gag. But she pressed on, driven by the urgent need to find Mark. The basement was vast, far larger than the house above suggested. Shadows slithered along the walls, stretching and twisting into forms that seemed almost human. Candles, long extinguished, lined the floor as if marking a path. Old photographs littered the ground, images of the missing townsfolk, frozen in fear, eyes wide and mouths open in silent screams. Leela's stomach churned. The mansion had been feeding on them, trapping their souls within its walls. A whisper brushed past her ear. "You can save him if you face what you fear." Suddenly, a shadow lunged from the far corner, its shape shifting between Mark's face and grotesque distortions. Leela stumbled back, heart racing, and watched as it lunged at her. With a desperate cry, she grabbed a nearby candle holder and swung it. The shadow dissipated into a swirl of black mist, leaving behind only cold emptiness. She found Mark pinned against the far wall by multiple shadows, his face pale and lips moving silently, as if screaming but producing no sound. Leela's hands trembled as she reached for him, recalling the journals she had read upstairs. They contained instructions, an incantation meant to free trapped souls, but the words were cryptic and required absolute courage, a confrontation with her deepest fears. Taking a deep breath, Leela began to chant. The shadows shrieked, their forms twisting violently as the words filled the basement. The walls seemed to ripple, mirrors reflecting not only her face, but her fears. Mark disappearing forever, the house swallowing her, the whispers overwhelming her mind. Every shadow in the room converged toward her, testing her resolve. "You will fail, just like them," the whispers hissed. But Leela pressed on. Her voice shook, but she refused to stop. Slowly, the shadows began to recoil, their humanoid shapes unraveling, revealing the faces of the trapped townsfolk, their expressions twisted in pain and fear. She could hear Mark's quiet sobs as he fell into her arms, trembling but alive. The basement shook violently, dust and debris falling from the ceiling. The mansion was resisting, fighting to keep its prey. The whisper screamed in a deafening crescendo, but Leela's determination never wavered. With one final cry of the incantation, the shadows let out a collective wail, dissolving into the damp stone floor and evaporating into mist. For a moment there was silence. Leela and Mark clung to each other, gasping for breath. The basement, and perhaps the mansion itself, seemed to exhale, a temporary reprieve. But outside, storm clouds rumbled, and the first pale light of dawn was still far away. Leela knew this wasn't over. The mansion had revealed its darkest truths, but something in the shadows still lingered, watching, waiting for the next soul foolish enough to enter. The basement shuddered as Leela and Mark stumbled backward, hearts pounding, dust swirling around them. The shadows that had tormented them for hours were gone, or at least they seemed to be. The air felt lighter, almost breathable, yet an uneasy tension lingered, as if the mansion itself was watching, waiting for the slightest misstep. Are we done?" Mark whispered, his voice hoarse. He wiped sweat from his brow, eyes wide with terror. "I think for now," Leela said, gripping his hand tightly. But even as she spoke, she could feel a subtle vibration underfoot, a pulse emanating from the very walls. The mansion had one last secret to reveal. They began to ascend the basement stairs, debris crunching under their feet. Each step seemed to echo unnaturally, the shadows flickering at the edges of their vision. When they reached the ground floor, the mansion's interior was shifting once again. Hallways twisted impossibly, doors appeared where none had been, and the portraits on the walls now screamed silently, mouths open in eternal horror. Suddenly, the mansion groaned, a sound like bones snapping, and the roof began to collapse. Beams fell around them as Leela pulled Mark through the crumbling hallways. They darted past the foyer, dodging shards of glass and splintered wood, until they reached the front door. It resisted, as if the house itself was holding them back. With all her strength, Leela shoved it open, and a blast of cold night air hit them, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke and decay. Outside, the storm had grown fiercer. Thunder rattled through the sky, and lightning illuminated the mansion's silhouette. The shadows that had plagued them seemed to writhe across its walls, wriggling like living creatures. Leela and Mark ran down the hill, hearts hammering, until the mansion finally gave a deafening roar and collapsed inward, a cloud of dust and debris rising into the night sky. They paused at the edge of the foggy town, gasping for breath. Mark looked at Leela, relief and fear mingling in his eyes. It's gone." Leela shook her head. "For now," she said quietly. Her mind replayed the basement, the trapped souls, the faces of the townsfolk caught in terror. The mansion had released them, but she could still feel it somewhere deep in the shadows, lingering like a predator biding its time. A cold wind swept past, carrying a faint, almost playful whisper. "We'll see you again." Leela froze, her blood running cold. Mark glanced around nervously, but saw nothing. They walked in silence toward the town, the first rays of dawn piercing through the fog, painting the streets in pale gold. Despite the light, the memories of the night clung to them, the whispers, the shifting rooms, the shadows that imitated their fears. Leela knew that the mansion's evil was not destroyed. It had only been contained for now. As they disappeared into the waking town, a shadow flickered across the ruins of Blackthorn Mansion, moving with unnatural purpose. The night had kept its promise, revealing terrifying truths, but it also reminded them that some darkness never truly dies. It waits, patient and eternal, ready to claim the next soul brave or foolish enough to listen to the whispers of midnight.